Karen Hampton, the president of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, sauntered through the neighborhood with a set of bolt cutters in hand. She had received several complaints about an Iser Jeep parked in one of the residents' driveways, a clear violation of the HOA's strict regulations. "This will only take a minute," she muttered to herself, approaching the offending vehicle. Peering around to ensure no one was watching, Karen swiftly snipped through the lock securing the Jeep. She pulled open the door and slid into the driver's seat, ready to have the nuisance vehicle towed away. As she turned the key in the ignition, however, Karen froze. Instead of the familiar rumble of the engine, a deafening siren blared to life, accompanied by flashing red and blue lights. Before she could react, a swarm of police officers surrounded the Jeep, weapons drawn. "Mom, step out of the vehicle with your hands up," a commanding voice shouted. Stunned, Karen complied, awkwardly exiting the Jeep with her hands raised. As the officers swiftly cuffed her, she realized with horror that this was no ordinary Jeep. It had been part of a policing operation the entire time. "Karen Hampton, you're under arrest for attempted vehicle theft and destruction of private property," the lead officer announced, reading her Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent." Karen's mind raced as she was escorted to a waiting police car. How could this have happened? She was only trying to uphold the HOA's rules and maintain the neighborhood's pristine appearance. Surely the officers would understand once she explained the situation. In the back of the squad car, Karen's initial shock gave way to indignation. She had been trying to do her job as HOA president, and now she was being treated like a common criminal. This was an outrage. She would make sure the police and the HOA heard about this. As the car pulled away, Karen spotted her neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, watching the scene unfold from her front porch. The older woman shook her head disapprovingly, and Karen felt a flush of embarrassment. She had always prided herself on being a respected community leader, and now she was being hauled off to jail in front of the entire neighborhood. The ride to the police station was a blur, and before long, Karen found herself sitting in an interrogation room, facing a stern-faced detective. "Mrs. Hampton, can you explain to us why you were trying to steal a police vehicle?" the detective asked, folding his arms across his chest. Karen bristled at the accusation. "I wasn't trying to steal anything. I'm the president of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, and I was simply trying to have an illegally parked vehicle removed from the neighborhood." The detective raised an eyebrow. "And you thought the best way to do that was to cut the lock and take the vehicle yourself?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She realized how absurd her actions must have seemed to the authorities. Suddenly, she felt very small and very much in trouble. The detective's piercing gaze bore into Karen as she struggled to find the right words. I was just trying to uphold the HOA's rules," she stammered. "That Jeep was an eyesore, and it was parked in violation of our regulations. I was going to have it towed. That's all." The detective shook his head. "Ma'am, you do realize that cutting someone's lock and taking their vehicle is a crime, regardless of whether or not you're the HOA president." Karen felt her face flush with embarrassment. Of course, she knew that breaking the law was wrong, but in the heat of the moment, she had let her zeal for maintaining the neighborhood standards cloud her judgment. "I understand that now," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to keep the community looking its best. I never intended to cause any real harm." The detective leaned back in his chair, studying Karen intently. "Well, your actions have certainly caused a significant disruption. We've been running a covert operation to track down a car theft ring, and your little stunt has blown our whole investigation wide open." Karen's eyes widened in horror. "A police sting operation? Oh no, I had no idea." "That's pretty obvious," the detective drawled. "Now we're going to have to start all over again, and you're going to be facing some serious charges." Karen felt her stomach churn with dread. She had always prided herself on being a respected member of the community, and now her actions had landed her in serious legal trouble. How would she ever live this down? As the detective continued to question her, Karen's mind raced. She had to find a way to minimize the damage and salvage her reputation. Perhaps she could plead for leniency, or even offer to make amends in some way. She couldn't let this incident define her legacy as HOA president. Finally, the detective leaned back in his chair and sighed. "All right, Mrs. Hampton, here's the deal. We're going to charge you with attempted vehicle theft and destruction of private property. However, if you agree to cooperate fully with our investigation, we may be able to work out a plea deal that could keep you out of jail." Karen's heart leaped with hope. Of course. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want to make this right." The detective nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Then let's start by you telling us everything you know about that car theft ring." As Karen launched into her account, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. She had always prided herself on being in control, but now her actions had spiraled out of her hands. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but Karen was determined to do whatever it took to salvage her reputation and her position within the community. Over the next few days, Karen's world had been turned upside down. She had been released on bail, but the humiliation of her arrest and the looming legal battle weighed heavily on her mind. The media had caught wind of the story, and her face was splashed across the local news, much to her dismay. As she sat in her living room, staring blankly at the television, Karen's phone began to ring. Glancing at the caller ID, she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. It was the HOA board. "Hello," she answered tentatively, bracing herself for the worst. "Karen, what on earth is going on?" The board president's voice crackled through the receiver. "We've been getting calls all day about your little incident with the police. The neighbors are in an uproar, and the HOA's reputation is being dragged through the mud." Karen swallowed hard, her mind racing to find the right words. I can explain, I promise. It was all a misunderstanding, A misunderstanding." The board president interrupted, his voice rising in anger. "You were caught trying to steal a police vehicle, Karen. How is that a misunderstanding?" Karen winced, the harsh reality of the situation hitting her like a ton of bricks. "I was just trying to uphold the HOA's rules and maintain the neighborhood's appearance," she pleaded. "I had no idea it was part of a policing operation." There was a long, tense silence on the other end of the line. Finally, the board president spoke again, his tone cold and unforgiving. "Well, your good intentions have caused a lot of damage, Karen. The board has voted, and we're suspending you from your position as president, effective immediately." Karen's heart sank. "But you can't do that. I've worked so hard for this community, The decision is final," the board president interrupted. "We can't have someone with a criminal record representing the HOA. You're lucky we don't revoke your membership entirely." Tears of frustration and humiliation began to well up in Karen's eyes. "Please, you have to understand." "Understand what, Karen?" the board president snapped. "That you're above the law? That you can just break into people's property whenever you feel like it? I'm sorry, but we can't have that kind of behavior in our community. Goodbye." The line went dead, leaving Karen sitting in stunned silence. Her worst fears had been realized. Not only was she facing legal consequences, but she had also lost the position that had given her so much power and influence within the neighborhood. With a shaky hand, Karen set down her phone, her mind racing. She couldn't let this happen, not after all the work she had put into making Evergreen Hills the pristine, orderly community she envisioned. She had to find a way to regain control, no matter what it took. Suddenly, a glimmer of an idea began to take shape in her mind. If the HOA board wouldn't listen to reason, maybe there was another way to get them to see things her way. Karen's lips curled into a determined smile as she set about putting her plan into motion. In the days that followed, Karen Hampton worked tirelessly to put her plan into action. She knew that she needed to act quickly if she wanted to regain her position as HOA president and restore her reputation within the community. First, she reached out to her most loyal supporters on the HOA board, pleading with them to reconsider her suspension. She painted a dire picture of the neighborhood's future without her steady hand at the helm, warning that property values would plummet and the community's pristine appearance would be ruined. "I made a mistake, but I've learned from it," Karen insisted. I'm the only one who can truly keep Evergreen Hills the way it's supposed to be. Please, you have to give me another chance." To her relief, a few of the board members seemed to waver, their loyalty to Karen outweighing their concerns about her legal troubles. However, the majority remained steadfast in their decision, unwilling to risk the HOA's reputation by reinstating her. Frustrated, Karen turned to her next tactic, appealing directly to the neighborhood residents. She organized a town hall meeting, using her well-honed public speaking skills to paint a harrowing picture of the community's future without her leadership. "If I'm not here to enforce the rules, our property values will plummet," Karen warned the gathered crowd. "The landscaping will become unkempt, the streets will be littered with unsightly vehicles, and our pristine neighborhood will become a blight on the entire community." Many of the residents nodded in agreement, their concerns about the HOA's decision evident on their faces. Karen seized the opportunity, pleading with them to pressure the board to reinstate her. "I've devoted so much of my time and energy to making Evergreen Hills the wonderful place it is today," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Please don't let my mistake undo all of that hard work. I'm begging you, speak up and let the board know how much you need me." The residents erupted into applause, many of them rushing forward to express their support for Karen. Buoyed by their enthusiasm, she knew she was one step closer to regaining her position. As the town hall meeting came to a close, Karen felt a glimmer of hope. She had managed to sway public opinion in her favor, and now she just needed to convince the stubborn HOA board to listen. With renewed determination, she set out to do whatever it took to reclaim her rightful place as the leader of Evergreen Hills. Over the next week, Karen's campaign to regain her position as HOA president intensified. She continued to rally the residents, organizing petition drives and letter-writing campaigns directed at the board members. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear that the majority of the community supported her return. However, the HOA board remained steadfast in their decision, refusing to budge despite the residents' outcry. Karen knew she needed to find a way to break their resolve, and she was willing to go to extreme lengths to do so. One evening, as she was scrolling through her phone, Karen stumbled upon a piece of information that would prove to be her saving grace. It seemed that one of the board members, a man named Edward Williamson, had a rather sordid past, one that involved a DUI and a subsequent cover-up. Karen's eyes narrowed as a devious plan began to take shape in her mind. She knew that if she could threaten to expose Williamson's indiscretion, he would have no choice but to support her reinstatement. It was a risky move, but at this point, Karen was willing to do whatever it took to regain her power. The next day, Karen arranged a private meeting with Williamson, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. As they sat across from each other in a dimly lit coffee shop, she wasted no time in getting to the point. "Edward, I have something that I think you're going to be very interested in," she said, her voice low and measured. Williamson's brow furrowed with confusion. "What are you talking about, Karen?" Karen leaned forward, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I know about your little DUI incident a few years back, the one you managed to keep out of the press." Williamson's face drained of color, his eyes widening with fear. How did you find out about that?" "That's not important," Karen replied, waving a dismissive hand. "What is important is that you're going to help me get my position back on the HOA board." Williamson's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "You can't be serious. You're blackmailing me." Karen nodded, her expression unwavering. "That's exactly what I'm doing, Edward. And if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure that little secret of yours becomes front-page news." Williamson sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He knew that if the truth about his DUI became public, it would not only ruin his reputation, but also jeopardize his position on the HOA board. Reluctantly, he agreed to Karen's demands, vowing to convince the other board members to reinstate her. As Karen left the coffee shop, a sense of triumph and relief washed over her. She had won, and she was one step closer to reclaiming her rightful place as the Queen of Evergreen Hills. However, a small part of her couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt at the lengths she had gone to achieve her goal. In the days that followed, Karen's plan began to unfold with a precision that surprised even her. Williamson, true to his word, worked tirelessly to sway the other HOA board members, using a combination of persuasion and veiled threats to secure their support for Karen's reinstatement. One by one, the resistant board members capitulated, their concerns about Karen's legal troubles and her questionable actions gradually overshadowed by their fear of Williamson's revelations. It was a delicate dance, but Karen watched with a growing sense of satisfaction as the pieces fell into place. Finally, the day of the critical HOA board meeting arrived, and Karen found herself once again seated at the head of the table, her position as president restored. The other board members eyed her warily, their discomfort palpable, but Karen paid them little mind. She was in control once more, and that was all that mattered. As the meeting progressed, Karen wasted no time in reasserting her dominance. She outlined a series of aggressive new initiatives, each one designed to tighten the HOA's grip on the community and solidify her own power. The other board members, cowed by Williamson's implied threats, dutifully agreed to her proposals, their objections silenced by the weight of their own guilty secrets. Karen basked in her victory, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that she had emerged from this ordeal stronger than ever. The residents too seemed to have embraced her return, their enthusiastic support evident in the numerous messages and phone calls she received in the days that followed. However, Karen's triumph was short-lived. As she was leaving the HOA office one evening, she was confronted by a group of concerned citizens, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "What are you doing, Karen?" one of the residents, a young woman named Sarah, demanded. "We supported you because we thought you'd be a force for good in this community, not a tyrant." Karen bristled at the accusation, her eyes narrowing. "I'm doing what's best for Evergreen Hills," she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. "The rules must be enforced, no matter what." "But at what cost?" Sarah shot back. "You've turned this place into a nightmare, with your petty demands and your heavy-handed tactics. We won't stand for it anymore." The other residents murmured in agreement, their faces set with determination. Karen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that her carefully constructed power base was beginning to crumble around her. As the confrontation escalated, Karen knew that she was once again facing a critical turning point. She had fought so hard to regain her position, but now she found herself at the center of a growing rebellion, one that threatened to upend everything she had worked so hard to achieve. In the aftermath of the confrontation with the concerned residents, Karen found herself on the defensive, her grip on power slipping through her fingers. The once fervent support of the community had turned to outrage, and she knew that she needed to act quickly to regain control. Retreating to her home, Karen pored over the HOA's bylaws, searching for any loopholes or legal maneuvers that could help her solidify her position. She knew that the residents' anger was justified, but she refused to let her hard-won power be taken away so easily. As she delved deeper into the HOA's rules and regulations, an idea began to take shape in Karen's mind. Perhaps she could use the very system she had once abused to her advantage, finding a way to silence her critics and cement her authority over the community. With renewed determination, Karen set out to put her plan into action. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, summoning the members with a sense of urgency that brooked no argument. When they gathered, she presented her proposal, a sweeping set of amendments to the HOA's bylaws that would grant her unprecedented control over the community. The other board members were taken aback by the audacity of Karen's proposal, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and unease. Williamson, in particular, seemed uncomfortable, his eyes darting nervously as Karen laid out her vision for Evergreen Hills. "These changes will ensure that our community continues to thrive," Karen insisted, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We can't let a few disgruntled residents undermine everything we've worked so hard to achieve." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly torn between their loyalty to Karen and their concerns about the far-reaching implications of her proposed amendments. Karen sensed their hesitation and pressed her advantage, reminding them of the consequences they would face if they dared to defy her. Faced with the threat of their own secrets being exposed, the board members reluctantly agreed to the changes, their hands tied by Karen's ruthless machinations. As the meeting drew to a close, Karen leaned back in her chair, a smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Excellent," she purred. With these new bylaws in place, Evergreen Hills will be stronger than ever, and I'll be here to make sure it stays that way. Outside the meeting room, the residents of Evergreen Hills were gathering, their anger and frustration boiling over. They had witnessed Karen's transformation from a well-intentioned, if overzealous, HOA president to a power-hungry tyrant, and they were determined to put a stop to her reign of terror. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, the rumblings of a full-blown rebellion began to echo through the streets, and Karen Hampton found herself at the center of a storm that threatened to consume her. The tension in Evergreen Hills had reached a fever pitch as the residents mobilized against Karen's increasingly authoritarian rule. Word of the HOA's new bylaws had spread like wildfire, sparking outrage and a growing determination to take back control of the community. Karen, however, remained undaunted, convinced that her position was now unassailable. With the HOA board firmly under her thumb and the majority of the residents cowed into submission, she believed that her reign as the undisputed queen of Evergreen Hills was secure. But the residents had other plans. Led by the determined and outspoken Sarah, they launched a campaign of civil disobedience, openly defying Karen's edicts and rallying their neighbors to join the cause. Protests and marches erupted throughout the neighborhood, the air thick with chants and the sound of raised voices. Karen watched the unfolding chaos with a mixture of disbelief and fury. How did these people challenge her authority? Didn't they understand that she was only doing what was best for the community? Desperate to regain control, Karen resorted to ever more draconian measures, dispatching private security teams to enforce the HOA's new rules and even threatening to levy exorbitant fines against those who dared to defy her. But the residents refused to back down, their resolve only strengthening in the face of her heavy-handed tactics. As the conflict escalated, Karen found herself increasingly isolated, her once loyal supporters turning against her as the full extent of her abuse of power became clear. Even the HOA board, cowed by her earlier threats, began to waver, sensing the growing tide of public sentiment turning against them. In a last-ditch effort to salvage her position, Karen made a desperate plea to the city authorities, pleading for their intervention and the use of police force to quell the rebellion. But to her dismay, her pleas fell on deaf ears, the officials unwilling to lend their support to what they saw as a clear abuse of power. As the sun set on Evergreen Hills, the residents gathered in the town square, their voices united in a chorus of defiance. Karen, watching from the shadows, realized with a sinking feeling that her reign had come to an end. The community she had worked so hard to control had risen up against her, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. With a heavy heart, Karen gathered her belongings and slipped away into the night, the weight of her failures and the consequences of her actions bearing down on her. As she drove away from the place she had once considered her domain, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever be able to regain the power and respect she had so ruthlessly fought to maintain. The residents of Evergreen Hills, meanwhile, celebrated their victory, their sense of community and shared purpose stronger than ever. They knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, but they were determined to rebuild their neighborhood on a foundation of trust, compassion, and a shared commitment to the greater good. And as the sun rose on a new day in Evergreen Hills, the residents knew that they had reclaimed their rightful place as the true stewards of their community, and that the era of Karen Hampton's reign of terror had come to a long overdue end.